Welcome, everybody, to the 2021-2022 Coaches Clinic. My name's Karen Emmons. I'm the state director, and I'm joined here for this session by Emily Owens, who is the assistant state director. This morning, this hour, from 8 to 9 this morning, we're going to do an intro to Science Olympiad. And that will include a lot of information. We're going to start very far back and then cover a variety of topics. So hang in there, even if you've heard some of this before. A Science Olympiad tournament is like a track meet. In other words, so a team of 15 students from a school comes to the tournament. And in a track meet, you have, your sprinters and your hurdlers and long distance runners. And we call the different things that you can do events, right? So you have a person who's a hurdler, and they'll have the hurdles at this time, and the 100-meter hurdles at this time, and the 200-meter hurdles at this time, and maybe somebody's got the 100-meter dash at this time, and somebody's got the long jump at this time. So in our case, chem lab is an event, anatomy is an event, bridges is an event, and so forth. Everything's happening around the same time. So there's a schedule. So some events are being run at the same time, and you'll need to pay attention to the schedule when you assign students to events. And we'll talk about that schedule a little bit later. We also, students will get medals in their individual events. So they'll be seeing how they're performing themselves. And then there's a team score that is comprised of the students' scores on the team across all the events. And the top teams win trophies at the tournament. We have 3 divisions in Science Olympiad. Division A is for 3rd to 5th graders. We're not covering that today. If you have questions about Division A, contact me later, please, and I'll point you in the right direction. Division B is 5th through 8th grade. And you'll notice something here. Yes, I said 5th. I said 5th in Division A, and I said as the top grade in Division A, and 5th in Division B is the lowest grade. So if you have 5th graders participating, they must choose for the year Division A or Division B for the whole year. They can't serve on a Division A and a Division B team in one school year. You'll see a lot of national statements that Division B is 6th through 9th grade. I get asked questions about this all the time. We allow 5th graders in Virginia to be on a Division B team if you choose. So you can, and that's actually true anywhere you go, at any kind of national tournament, they'll allow you your 5th grader, but not lower than that. No, nothing lower than a 5th grader. And think carefully if you're including 5th graders on your team. It's tough for them, right? They're young, and Division A might be better for them because they are competing full-fledged, full out against 8th graders. And that can be a big difference of learning and skills and just how comfortable they all are. You'll see some statements that that VASO includes, or not VASO, but that nationals under certain circumstances includes 9th graders on Division B teams. We do not do that. So, and even for nationals, it's under very limited circumstances. So for VASO does not allow 9th graders on Division B teams. Division C is high school, 9th through 12th grade. Well, how do you participate in Science Olympiad? Registration on the website, and we're going to go to that in a minute. But remember, it is a team-based thing. You're obviously here, I think you know that you're here for coaches, you're the head coaches, so you're looking to making teams. It's not for individual students for here and here. A team comes from a school. This is the front page of our VASO website, virginiaso.org. I'm going to hop around here because everything that I show you today is on this website, so you can see where we're going. So we're going to go to coaches registration. Here we are, and this is the registration page of our website. You can have up to 3 teams from your school. If this is your first year that your school has participated, you can still have up to 3, but we do encourage you to think, we do recommend just 1 team your first year while you get your feet wet and you learn how all of this works. The more teams you run, yes, the more students you can have participating, but it can be very complicated, all the logistics of it. New this year, if you're fielding 3 school teams from your school already and you need some more capacity because you want to take maybe 5 teams to an invitational or things like that, and we'll talk about invitationals later, contact me. For a reduced fee, will allow you to field some invitational only teams too, over 3. But then again, but you need to contact me directly about that. The registration specifics start here. And it's really important though, and you start with a registration intent form. Most of you have filled this out. You just click here, it's a Google form. It just tells us that our school planning to register. We have this many, these are the coaches. We're thinking about fielding this many teams, but we're not going to hold you to it. You can change it. And so it's just some basic information for us to get ready to see your registration and get it going. But then importantly is our registration packet, and that's a big deal, and you need to download that so that we can see all of what's in it. There's all, excuse me, so you can see what all of what's there. It has very specific instructions. It's trying to lay out all the things that need doing for registration. Before I go into that though, I want to show you a couple other things. We had the coaches clinic sign up on this page. There's pricing information. If you're looking for pricing information to see how much it costs. There's club officer guidelines. If you are a high school and you want your club officers, your president and vice president or something to get the emails and to be part of being able to handle some of the logistics of the student signs ups and the registrations, that's okay with a high school, but there's guidelines about how we want that done. So please read those. We ask, for example, that we don't get specific student emails, that they create an alias kind of email like Hogwarts SO at Gmail or something like that that can be a forward to them, so that we aren't holding all these emails of minors. There's the registration portal, the Silent PIAD test program. So I'm going to go into the registration packet. The first page of the registration packet talks about the model of how we're doing SO this year. And again, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But the one thing that I really want everybody to see right now is that the second page lays out the registration pieces and where they happen. So there are 2 systems this year. And depending on if you've ever been involved before, you may see one system or the other. We have something called the VASO portal, and the links for these are down here at the bottom. The VASO portal is something just for Virginia only, and that is where primarily all of the registration is going to take place. That's where you're going to make an account in that. You'll see that your forms got submitted. You'll enter your preferences for which device day you want. You'll generate an invoice. That's where you'll pay. All of that happens in the VASO portal. Also, we're going to be collecting the student permissions in the VASO portal, though that's coming later. So please keep that in mind, that system, all of those registration pieces happen there. Then you will have heard of a program called Silent PIAD. We're going to do a whole hour training on that at 11 o'clock today about the testing program. This is the program where the kids will come in, we'll do written tests in there. If you're going to any invitationals, you'll see them using Silent PIAD a lot. It is a nationwide program. And it's an amazing program. I'm excited to show you all it later today, but it's just for testing. Now, people get a little bit confused because Silent PIAD is an enterprise system that has a registration component in the front. We have tried to turn off a lot of that, but we don't own that program. So we've done what we can to turn it off, but it might look to you like you need to pay in Scilympiad. Well, if you try to pay in Scilympiad, we've set the price to 0. So, you could try to pay and it'll tell you, oh, you paid a registration fee of 0. You haven't paid. You have to pay in the portal. We just made it so that you can register and get into the Scilympiad site to get your teams going, because you construct your teams there, you put kids on events there. So please, if you have any questions about it, come back to this chart in the registration document to see what is happening in what section. All right. Then there's 2 forms in this packet that need your signature and your principal's signature. One of them is to say that, yes, this team is sponsored by the school. And then the other form is to recognize that these activities, especially the written test part, is going to happen at the school. So, so those 2 forms are there and will have to be submitted to us. That's one of the steps of registration. You can see it says submit the 2 registration forms. After you've submitted the registration forms in the to us, and we'll note it in the portal, and after you've entered your, the number of teams and generated an invoice and paid it in the portal, we'll assign you to a device day. So you have to give in the portal, you have to give your preferences for which device day you want. And quite bluntly speaking, a device day could fill up and you might get your second choice. So you'll be giving a first and a second choice. So, as I said, just move along, please, in your registrations to get that going. One note about paying the invoice. If those of you that have like a front office, if you're a teacher and you're asking your finance person to pay the invoice, there is, they don't need a login into the portal to pay the invoice. That's one of the nice things about the VASO portal. Scilympiad, you need a login for absolutely everything, but that's an open page, the ability to pay an invoice. So in the portal, when you're there, you can go and give the open link to where the invoices are to your finance person, and then they can pay it without having to make an account in the portal. I'm going to pause for a second for questions. Let's see, could I talk about how specifically to register individual students, get permissions signed, and if they're registered with VASO, are they automatically registered to be able to participate in invitationals? So we're going to talk about some of the specifics about how Scilympiad interacts with invitationals later. I mean, it depends, but we will ask you later, you will be entering your students in Scilympiad, and you'll be putting them on teams and assigning them to events. And we're going to ask you to have their parents sign permission slips, which again, we'll give you a link for that. That's going to be an online permission slip. So you'll look for more information about that. That allows them to participate in Virginia in VASO sponsored events. But for them to participate in invitational, I'm sorry, did somebody have a, so to participate in an invitational, you have to see what the requirements of an invitational are. Invitationals are independently run tournaments. And we're going to talk about them in a minute. So we don't control them. And of course, so many of them are virtual. You could be doing invitationals in California and Alaska and whatever. They're not under our control. So you have to do whatever the invitational tournament says. But one of the nice things about if it's a Scilympiad run tournament, your pool of students that you'll create in our Scilympiad system, because Scilympiad is a national system, your account and that pool you'll create will work in other invitationals, but you may have to do something else about permission slips. Did that answer your question, Holly? Anybody else have?
Thank you very much.
Anybody else have any questions on that? Just the kind of the registration piece. Okay, so what does your registration get you? I've talked a little bit about it. It gets you participation in a regional tournament. That's the core tournament for Science Olympiad. Each school can only attend one regional a year, and you must attend a regional in your state. And we will discuss our regional model in a minute. Our regional model is going to split over 2 days, all right? But it's still going to be considered one regional. You get participation in states. So the highest scoring schools at regionals are invited to come and participate in the state tournament. We are planning and hoping to have a fully in-person date for states on March 26th at UVA. Of course, that's dependent on the world, how things are going, but we will keep people posted. So actually, we haven't put the date on that here, but that is the plan. We do have, how do you get to go to states? How do they get selected? We have a device on the page of regionals. It says qualifying for states. You can find this qualifying for states. It explains exactly how that happens. But essentially, the VASO will figure out how much capacity we can handle at states. And that may be a little bit dependent on what UVA tells us we can bring. Sometimes it's dependent on how many teams we can fit into a lab or a variety of other, whatever the spaces are that we can get registered. But again, this year it may be dependent a little bit on UVA too. So we choose a capacity, and then we assign those openings to the regionals based on regional size. And then the top scoring schools at regionals are offered those state slots. Now note that I said schools, not teams. If you're fielding more than one team, whether you are invited or not will depend on the performance of your top scoring team at the regional. So it's not an average over all of your teams. It's not the best of this team in this event and the best of this team in this and the best of this team. We look at one team all the way across, your best scoring team. So if you're trying for that and you're fielding multiple teams, I'll be honest, you may want to think then about having a team and a B team, so that you are more likely, so your high scoring team does well enough to qualify for states. After you get an invite, you don't have to send exactly that team that qualified. You can rearrange the team after that point. So you could cull from your multiple teams if you have them, or you could even invite a new participant or two that didn't participate in regionals. But I will tell you though, that this is one of the hardest things a coach has to do, which is why we suggest new teams start with just one team, or one school starts with just one team. But we can address ways of doing this in the coaches roundtable. This is a common conversation that we have in the coaches roundtable, if this is something you all would like to talk about. So hold your thoughts about that. Then out of states, your registration with us, if you are one of the top scoring Division B and C teams at states, you get to go to the national tournament. Your registration with us also gives you the right to attend invitationals. And we're going to say more about that also later in this session. But you need to know that you must be registered with us, and you cannot send more teams to an invitational than you have registered with us. And that's really important. And invitational directors are required to contact me and ask and check to see how many teams you have registered. So it does get checked. So please be thoughtful and attentive to that. I'm going to do a very, very quick intro to events. We're going to cover events in a lot more detail in the next hour, where to get them, how to read them, what's really different this year, But for the moment, I'm going to tell you what you need to know for setting up your team. Students work on events typically in pairs. There are a few exceptions where the event may allow 3. And we'll look at how you look at event rules in the next session to tell that, but it's typically a pair. So and here is our event page on our website. Let's take anatomy and physiology, for example. If you're fielding one team, 2 of your students could go together to anatomy. They're working together. They're not competing against each other. They are working on one test together by communicating, now for that one team, you can only send 1 pair to anatomy. You can't send 2 or 3 or 4 pairs. Each team essentially gets 1 entry into each event. So you would have 1 pair go to anatomy. You might have a pair go to disease detectives, a pair go to rocks and minerals, and so on. Hopefully you get the idea about that. Oh, I see a question about qualifying. I've answered that, Jackie. Qualifying for states is dependent. The question is qualifying for states dependent on school average ranking or team ranking? No, it is based on the rank of your best performing team at regionals. So it is better to stack good members on 1 team than spreading on 2 teams if you are trying to qualify for states. Yes, it's better. It's typically better to have an A team and a second team. All right, so going back to this. So a pair of disease detectives, a pair to go to rocks and minerals. You know, though, that you don't have to have the same pair always work together. If I'm on your team, maybe my partner would be Sam for anatomy, and my partner could be Kathy for rocks and minerals. So you can mix and match too. It doesn't have to be, oh, Sam is my partner for everything. Now you can do it that way if you want. Some teams do it that way for just, especially teams, a lot of times with the younger kids will do it that way just to, so, okay, they've got their buddy, their friend, and they do it all together. But most teams don't do that, but you could do it that way if you wanted. But let's talk about what this looks like if you're fielding more than 1 team, because this is really important. The team is the basic unit in Science Olympiad. If you're fielding more than 1 team, they are competing against each other. Teams are completely different entities and they don't mix. So you have to divide the kids into teams first. Only after that can you assign them to their events. So if you have 2 teams and Johnny is on team red and Susie is on team gold, they'll never be able to be partners in an event, even if they're doing the same event. So if they're both doing anatomy, Johnny will go with another red team partner to anatomy, and Susie will go with a gold team partner to anatomy. Hopefully that's clear about what you need to do with that. And then the other piece that you need to be paying attention to is the event schedule. And that's critical because, again, as I said earlier, events are held in typically hour-long sessions throughout the day, and more than 1 event is offered in 1 session. So a student can't be in more than 1 event that is being held in the same session. And part of that event schedule and conflicts shows up on in this tab. But Emily is going to be taking over now, and she's going to talk about the model for the year and the device day and the written test day. And as part of that, you'll see the event schedules. So you ready, Emily? I'm going to turn it over to you. Stop my screen share.
I'm ready.
Okay.
So quickly, just to address a few questions that I got in the chat regarding registration. First, when you are registering your teams with VASO, we are not asking you to select at that time what students are doing which events. You have control over that up until like a week or so before the tournament is when we ask you to have a lot of stuff done in Scilympiad. So that's not a requirement of your registration to have all of that figured out. And the second piece, just to like really hit it home, it is one pair, or in a few cases, one trio of students per event per team. So if you field one team, you can only send one pair of students to anatomy. That came up a few times in the chat. All right.
All right, now you can direct your questions to me while Emily's talking.
Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is our schedule for our regional tournament. So under the tournament tab for our regionals, we've posted some different announcements here, if you've been following along with them, regarding the dates that we have for our regionals, as well as our schedules. And so on the side here, you can see that we have a link that's going to describe our regional format that I'm going to get in depth with. But we have a hybrid format this year, which is different than anything we've done in the past. If you were with us last year, we were completely virtual. If you've been with us in more traditional years, we have been completely in person. And VASO has chosen to use a model this year that is going to allow us to minimize overlap and contact between teams for COVID protocols, while still giving us the opportunity to do some in-person work with our build events, which was one of the things most missed from last season. So because of that, there are 2 days that every team who registers with VASO will have on their calendars. The first day is going to be our written test day, and that is going to be a day where every team in Virginia will be competing, and that's January 22nd. The written test slate of events, the written test slate of events are just the ones that don't require a build component. So those are clearly listed in this event document. Everything under regional written test day tells you, like, you're going to be taking the anatomy test in Scilympiad on January 22nd. Every student who's in Codebusters will do that event in Scilympiad on January 22nd. And the schedule for those events was just recently released. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how this works. You'll see that we have this divided up into 6 sessions. And Karen had mentioned that there are some event conflicts that group certain events together, that they happen at the same time. And that's going to, in some part, determine what events each individual student can do. So for example, on our written test day, everybody in Virginia from 9 to 9:55 in Division C, which is our high school division, will be doing the anatomy test, the astronomy test, or the environmental chemistry test. Whatever students you've assigned to do that will log into Scilympiad during that window to complete that test. This means that a student could not be assigned to both anatomy and astronomy because they overlap. And this also means that if you field multiple teams, each team's pair for a particular event will be going at the same time. So our schedule is in these 6 blocks with those different clusters of events. The tests are about 50 minutes long, and again, will be done on Scilympiad, which is our virtual platform, in the satellite model. Now, what the satellite model means is that your students will be at your school or a school site that you have found, and you and other parent or other chaperones will be proctoring this event, these tests for them. Okay, so different than last year where they were in their individual homes taking their tests, not even with their partners in person, but they will be sitting with their partners, but doing it online in this schedule. So again, everybody in Virginia will be doing their written tests on this day. Okay, and we have the complementary Division B schedule as well. It follows the same 6 sessions, but of course they have different events and different pairings. Not every event has a written test component. So some of those events, which are device only, will not show up on this first day. They will be saved for the device testing day, which is not the same for every team. So the device days, when you register in our portal, Karen was mentioning that you have to choose a device day. Those 3 dates are the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th of February at 3 different locations. And when you register, you have to put in like your order of preference of those dates. The date of your chosen device day will determine which regional you are competing in. So she mentioned that different regionals, depending on the capacity, like how many schools are represented there, that will be what we use to determine how many schools from that regional qualify for state. This is how we're grouping it. So even though everybody is taking the written tests on the same day on January 22nd, you are actually competing only against the schools that are at your respective device days. Now, of course, if you're fielding multiple teams, all teams from your school have to attend the same device day. And I'm going to show you a little bit about the schedule of that so you can kind of wrap your head around how this is going to be slightly different from builds in the past. So we haven't released the complete device day schedule, in part because it has team numbers and things on it, and we're going to be working out, who's assigned where. But in this event document, we've given like a sample schedule. So for device days, this is not going to be an entire day ordeal for you and your teams. The written test day will be those 6 hours, but your device day will only be a small section of the day where your team members will show up and go through a rotation of the build events that require the students to do something on site. So for example, if you're attending a device day for a Division B team and you are slotted to come in at 8:15, which would be one of the earliest possible sessions on that given day, you'll bring your team. If you're fielding more than one team, they'll show up at the same time. And then those students are going to go through a rotation to the different build events so that they can test their devices with our event supervisors, right? This is something that's really hard for us to do virtually, and it's also not fun to do virtually. So this is why we've created this opportunity for students to come in to a building in person to show their devices. Now, this rotation is going to have all of our students pretty much traveling together, unless they're, in this particular case, in Mission Possible and going to be staying in one place the whole time. But your team will travel from one event to the next. The students assigned to that event will test their device. Other students who are not in that event will be there cheering them on, and then we rotate to the next one. So it's a small window of time, about 15 minutes for each event, for them to test the thing that they have built with those event supervisors. So you can see that in this rotation, you're in and out in about an hour and a half. So not a full day, just that small window where we have 5 teams at a time, bringing their devices and testing them, and then they can go back home and go about their day. So some important things to know about what this means for us in terms of getting back into buildings, since we didn't have to do this last year. It's going to require that we have chaperones, 2 adults for a team, for each team, to travel with them. And this also means that those chaperones will have to abide by whatever the policies are of the building that we're visiting. I know currently in Fairfax County, which is where 2 of our device testing sites are, Fairfax and Lake Braddock, the expectation is that chaperones are vaccinated, and that everybody, student participants as well as adults, are wearing a mask in the building. So these are things that we're going to have to take note of as you guys are planning for these days, that we're going to need adults who fit that criteria, that are vaccinated, who can provide proof of vaccination, and are going to abide by the masking policy. This obviously will not be something that is centralized for the written test day. But if you're bringing in other adults to help you proctor exams, then of course you will have to make sure that they're abiding by whatever your local school policy is, which may include masking, proof of vaccination, etc. Especially if you're fielding more than one team, it's likely that you're going to need more than one proctor on written test day. So that's something to be mindful of this season, which is different than years past. All right. Are there other questions about the regional format before we talk a little bit about invitationals?
We've had one question about chaperones.
Yes.
Do we need 2 chaperones in addition to the coach, or can the coach be a chaperone? No, the coach can certainly be a chaperone. We're talking about essentially 2 adults. It can be the coaches, or whoever, but only 2 adults with a team.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And just something to keep in mind, because I know this is like something I'm thinking about with my own team, is that if you're fielding more than one team, they're not going to be in the same place at the same time during the device day, because even though they'll be in the building at the same time, they won't be in the same room at the same time. And so that might require more chaperones or more adult bodies than a C team is used to bringing. Like usually it's just me and my assistant coach, but we're going to have more people than normal to make this work compared to years in the past.
Okay, there's still some confusion on this. Just 2 adults. 2 adults with a team. We're just calling them chaperones. Those adults could be the coach, could be other people. 2 adults.
Right. So if I'm the coach, it would be me and one other adult that could go with a team.
You don't need one chaperone for each event. 2 adults. We're talking about just device day now. I'm seeing a lot of questions come through. I'll return back to written day in a minute. 2 adults with a team walking through the rotation on device day.
So
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I just pulled up written test day. If you want to talk about it.
On written test day, this is somewhat up to you. You're going to be in your school. We're not going to count or check to see how many adults or chaperones or proctors or whatever you have. But your school probably will have its own regulations, which we expect you to follow as you go into the school and do this. And the exams that are happening in a session must be proctored. So that probably will require 2 or 3 of you, right? Because I can envision like maybe you'll be in 2 different rooms and you'll want to have somebody with the students who are not testing in session 1, hanging with them. And then you'll have a proctor or 2 in a different room where your session 1 kids are testing. Or maybe you just divide off the room, or you do it in the cafeteria and you do it at ends of the cafeteria. We could talk about all the different ways people are thinking of doing this, but the tests must be proctored on written test day.
I think this will be a pretty significant topic in the coaches roundtable, because this is, even if you've been doing Science Olympiad in years past, the satellite model and specifically the hybrid model that Virginia is doing is new to everybody. And so the decisions that are made about how many adults you need, what spaces you need, that will depend on what your school requires, what you have available, and probably most importantly, how many teams you have. Because dealing with 45 students taking tests in a building is far different than dealing with 15 or even less than that if you're fielding a smaller team. And so some of those realities we'll talk about, and we can even brainstorm together, because it's, like I said, this is new for all of us. Was there anything else about the regional setup that people would like clarification on? Okay. So Karen mentioned invitational tournaments. And we just wanted to take a second to just remind you of some of the important things about invitationals. Invitationals are essentially practice tournaments. These are completely independent from Virginia Science Olympiad or from like state Science Olympiad organizations and their regional tournaments. They're completely optional. They require a separate registration with that individual tournament and also a separate fee paid just to them. Okay, it is therefore your choice completely if you want to do invitationals at all, or if you do, which ones you choose. They may be in different formats than what we are doing. In fact, it's probably very likely that they are in a different format than exactly what Virginia is doing. So they are really great practice for your teams if that's something that you want to commit the time and resources to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about like the different logistics that you have to be mindful of to not confuse the two registration processes, and also what those different formats may be if you're looking at tournaments that could, like Karen had said before, could be across the country. You could be participating in an invitational virtually that a California school is hosting, or last year we went to one that Hawaii was hosting. So you just never know. It is important, once again, to say that if you are registering 3 teams in Virginia, you may only register up to 3 teams at an invitational. If you register 2 teams in Virginia, you can only bring 2 teams to an invitational. The registration that you file with Virginia will limit the number of teams that we have on file for you with nationals, and that must be what you abide by for invitational registration. You can, of course, take fewer. If I have 3 teams register with Virginia, I don't have to take 3 teams at an invitational. I could register for just 1, but the numbers have to match. And as Karen mentioned before, we are offering an opportunity that if you would like to have more than 3 teams participate in an invitational, even though Virginia will only allow you to bring 3 to regionals, you can register invitational only teams with us for a reduced fee, but they must be registered with us because tournament directors for invitationals will check with Karen to verify that you are registered with Virginia, that you have paid your registration fees, and that those team numbers align, or that they don't exceed what Virginia has on file. Okay.
Can I also interject here to say that it's not kosher if let's say you're fielding 3 teams, it's not kosher to send on the same day 3 to one invitational and 3 to a different invitational. So it's per an invitational on the day. But the reason we know that sometimes schools feel like they want more than that can be that they're using invitationals to decide who's going to be on their regional team, which is why we're trying to offer you some help. If this is something you want to discuss with us, just contact me.
Yeah, I know that there maybe just, one of the nice things about invitationals is that because they are low stakes and just for practice and fun, you may have more students that are interested in that, or that you want to provide that opportunity to more students, and then you can pick from those results to make your regional team. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, and so I'm pleased that we're offering that option to give more students a chance to participate if the interest is there at your school. Nationals does keep a list of invitationals across the country. We also have some that are highlighted for us on the Virginia website. There are 2 that are happening in Virginia. Lake Braddock, which is my school, is hosting an invitational for Division B, and Fairfax High School is hosting an invitational for Division C. There are also some other out-of-state ones that are being highlighted on our website that we have connections with, but there's also a suggested invitational list. So that link takes you here, which is just a complete list of all these different invitational tournaments that are available, that are registered with the National Science Olympiad. I wanted to use this page though to talk about all the different models that you'll see listed and to compare them to what Virginia is doing so that you understand when you register for an invitational, what you may be signing up for. There are some across the country that are now they're moving back to a traditional in-person model. So that would mean that if you sign up to go to the Cypress Falls High School Invitational, that you're traveling to Houston, which I imagine at this time, most schools in this area are not super psyched about you doing. So when we say traditional in-person, that is the old, the long style model of you're there, all the teams are in the same school, going to different rooms, all mingling together, but you were on site at that location. You'll also see that there are some labeled satellite. Satellite tournaments are what our written test day is like in Virginia, where you're at your own school. Each team is at their own school, so there's no travel required. They are taking their tests in proctored rooms. So you as a coach or other adults that you have proctoring their events. But what I want to make sure that we understand is that satellite doesn't necessarily mean that it's only the written tests like what Virginia is doing. There are many different forms of satellite tournaments that could require coaches to set up materials for things like chem lab or experimental design ahead of time, to procure materials for the students to do the event with those manipulatives, with those lab materials at your school. So just because Virginia isn't asking our coaches to do that for these events doesn't mean that invitationals will abide by that same thing. There may be more prep to facilitate those events for your students. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do those events, right? Again, the thing about an invitational is that it's practice, it's for fun. You are not required to do every event at a tournament. So you could elect to go to some events and not others if you feel like you don't want to spend the time to set up a chemistry lab, or you don't have the resources to. But just know that that is something to look for when you select a tournament. If I'm looking at this one in Marietta, Georgia, that says satellite, I might want to click on their website to see if they're giving any specifics about how these events are going to be run. It needs a closer look than just saying satellite. Then is the mini model, which is where students are in their individual homes. They are distinctly not supposed to be at school together in a proctored model. They are supposed to be at home, not in the same room as their partners. And for those of you that competed last year in Virginia Science Olympiad, this is the model that we used for our regional and state tournaments. There are some tournaments that are using a hybrid model. Mainly the Lake Braddock Invitational. We are doing a satellite written test and then an in-person device build to try to emulate what Virginia is doing, but that model is, I would say, more rare. But regarding devices, that's another thing to pay attention to for satellite tournaments, is that if they are running the builds, like if they're running Bridge or Mission Possible, they may require a live Zoom, or they may ask that you submit a video, or they may have replaced it with a trial event or a different event that is fully virtual. So there's also a bunch of different models for build events that may be, it says satellite, but we may need to take a closer look at that. And again, you don't have to do any or all of the events if that particular model that they're choosing just isn't going to work for your team. One other thing to note about invitationals is that when you sign up for an invitational, it may ask you to provide information about who would be willing to be an event supervisor or even a test writer for an event. That invitationals sometimes ask teams or coaches to run events to make them happen. So be mindful of that you may need to proctor an event and grade an event if you commit to going to an invitational, or you may be asked to write a test to then also proctor it at the event. And they will call the role of the event supervisor, or ES, That could mean just proctoring, but some invitationals also take that to mean that you write the test. So make sure that you're clear about what the ask is when you submit your registration. If it says event supervisor, make sure you know if that means, am I writing it? Am I proctoring it? Or is it both? And I mean, the big thing here though is that, like, again, these are totally optional. They're just for your team if they want to do them, if you want to spend the time to do them, but they are really great practice. Karen, did I miss anything about invitationals?
Just to say that one of the one nice draw about an invitational, we can is that you get your tests back.
Oh yeah.
For regionals and states, you will not see your tests back. You will not get the feedback, but you'll get score sheets. You'll get tests back. So a lot of times, you know, if you're overwhelmed by all these, pay attention to this, buyer beware, stuff, you can just say to yourself, hey, for X dollars, I can go and get a whole bunch of written tests and get my kids to have experience with Scilympiad.
That's true. And it's a great little opportunity to kind of use an example, like for my tournament, for Division B, that like you could pay, like, so here's an example of like a fee structure, right? You can pay $40 and then you get access to all the written tests. Even if you don't want to pay the extra 60 to come and test devices, if that's, you know, too much logistical stuff for your mind at the moment, you get some tests out of it. And sometimes that's worth it, to just have those to be able to practice with for your students. So that is, I think, probably the biggest motivator for my team when we go to invitationals is we want the tests because we want to be able to learn from them.
We have some other questions that people have written. Somebody was asking, can the head coach be an event supervisor? That is a question for the specific invitational, right? Typically, yes, but you have to ask if we're not in charge of all these invitationals out there. You need to ask that of whatever invitational you're looking at.
And this brings up a good point too, that just try to remember that what we do in Virginia has no bearing on invitationals or vice versa. So if an invitational does something different than what we do, then please don't be angry with Karen.
Yes, and we could talk more about invitationals and which ones we all like during the coaches roundtable. So we're going to set that to the side. We're going to go back to a few other questions. Somebody wanted to know if written test day participants can bring their laptop, or do you need laptops from the school? We don't care what laptop you use. There are some suggestions and some things to think about, and we're going to talk about that during Scilympiad, because Scilympiad can behave a little funny in some instances. So we'll talk about that, but we don't care which is used. If one member of the team can't make the test day, the written test day, can one member take or show the device or the device day? Yeah, that's just fine. That's just fine.
I think also we might get into some of the like logistics. Build events especially have some unique rules around that, about like primary builders, that may provide you some flexibility with, like, as long as, you know, if one builder who made the devices there, they could have someone else come along to just help them test it. But that's unique to those type of events.
Then we have, will we have a practice written test day? We did one of these last year. We're actually going to open up Scilympiad for practice with in January, you know, a couple of weeks before the tournament, before the written test day. It's not going to be a one day, because we did not want to make all of you commit to a third day. So you can do it at your leisure. That means it won't be proctored, but we will open up Scilympiad. And it won't be like official tests, right? You won't get a full-fledged anatomy test. It'll be questions that will make you test your computer and your use of Scilympiad and some of that kind of stuff. But we will open it up That's a lot harder to set up than you realize. I actually set up a little practice tournament to show you today during Olympiad, and it took me most of the day. So it's a big deal to set one of those up, which is why we don't just keep it doing it and keep refreshing it and keep it open all the time. But we will provide that in January. Somebody wants to know, can the head coach be an event supervisor for Emily's Invitational at Lake Braddock? Emily is not asking for event supervisors. Her students are going to do it. Does anybody else have any questions?
So you will have some tournaments, not just mine, but there are other invitationals out there, especially if they're run by colleges, where there isn't an ask for you to be an event supervisor, but it really is just on a case-by-case basis. So we just wanted you to pay attention to that when you're like reading about the tournaments. But yeah, for mine specifically, my high school kids run all the events for the middle and elementary school students. And then related to the practice day, that is another advantage of an invitational. Not saying that if you don't want to spend the money or again the time, you don't have to, but it kind of does give you an opportunity for a practice day of Olympiad with real tests, with talking to event supervisors, with the chat. You're going to see that later on today to kind of know what we're talking about. But it does give you a full trial run as opposed to the open sessions that Karen's going to be creating.
And I'm just going to give you a little tip now, but we'll talk more about it later. When you practice, it would be good for you to have the opportunity to practice in the same place and with the same computers that you'll be using for our written test day. So that's my little tip here. We're going to stop the recording now and take a 2-minute break, and then we'll do events.